Okay guys, we're doing something a little bit different this time. We're actually starting off by explaining the system. There is multiple reasons for this. The first of which is that none of the rest of these guys have played Exalted, I don't believe.
No. An old edition one time.
One time.
You had me make a character for the last edition, but we never went anywhere with that.
Yeah. I think I started a pitch and started to try to run a game, and then something happened, we lost players, I don't know. But anyway, Exalted is a really fun system. It takes sort of the high fantasy that you have in maybe Dungeons & Dragons or another fantasy setting, and it basically turns everything up to like 100 on a scale of 1 to 10. You start out in Exalted at basically more powerful than you will ever be in a D&D game. You can literally leap tall buildings in a single bound, cast spells that destroy entire armies. You can wield a weapon the size of this table. All these sorts of things. Summon your weapon out of nowhere. Fight whole armies of demons by yourself. It's pretty intense. Sort of the references for it are things like Ninja Scroll, Read or Die, the Old Testament of the Bible. There's a whole lot of different influences on this game. A lot of it's very Eastern, but at the same time it also has a lot of references and inspiration from things like Greek mythology and Roman mythology. The world actually very much looks like the Mediterranean Sea, like in the center at least, and it gets more complex as you go outwards from there. And the main ruling faction in the world at the time the game is set, it has a lot of inspiration from both the Japanese shogunate and the Roman Empire. So it takes influences, inspiration, and even legends and mythology from a whole bunch of different locations, and puts them all together in a very grand world. So what you guys are seeing here is a map of creation. Before I get into explaining it too much, I have to explain one of the potential origin mythologies. So, the origin of this world, at least as it's told by some who know more than others, is that creation didn't used to exist. At one point in time, everything was pure chaos. Everything was completely random. There was no differentiation between one thing and the next. However, at some point, some part of this chaos took form and actually became a individual sort of idea, and it sort of affected everything around it, and eventually formed itself into several, you can call them titans, if you want to go to like Greek mythology, or basically that's where we're looking at. These titans ended up thinking, it would be great if there was somewhere in existence where things were ordered and structured, and they created creation. When they did so, they had to have something to hold creation down, or basically keep its form. So to separate this pocket of creation, they created 5 pillars. In the center you see that little red circle. That is a mountain that literally holds up the sky. It is the pillar of earth. And it's at the center of creation, in the center of the Blessed Isle. It is surrounded by the inland sea, or the blessed the sea there. And then there is the periphery around it. To the north, we have the pillar of air. The closer you get to the pillar of air, the more everything just becomes frozen air. Air is the element of gems and gemstones, so the most beautiful gems and largest gems all come from up north. It is basically frozen tundra most of the year there, and very, very powerful winds are always traveling in that area. To the east, we have the pillar of life. The further east you go, eventually you get to the point where everything is just plants and animals, and there's really little differentiation between the two. There are basically giant redwoods that stretch from as far down as you can go to as far high as you can go. The pillar itself basically just becomes a conjoining of these redwoods. To the south, we have the Pillar of Fire. The further south you go, the hotter it gets, the less there is, not necessarily living as much as life changes. So you get to creatures that are creatures of flame. There are desert nomads. It has a lot of inspiration from the Middle East, Egypt, that sort of thing. And it is also a recent addition to the world is that people have found a flower there that they can grind up and create into a substance somewhat like gunpowder. Not exactly, but similar. To the west, we have the Pillar of Water. Eventually, everything there just becomes water. You can't breathe anymore because the air is water, the ground is water, there is no ground below the water, and there are all kinds of creatures of mythology down there. There's the Great Kraken, there's a whale large enough to swallow whole cities. It just becomes a very aquatic setting. Literally, Atlantis exists out there somewhere. It has a different name here, but it's at the bottom of the ocean, and there's basically people living out there in a sort of Bioshock-like setting. So anyway, these Titans created the world and saw that it was good in a way. And while they were doing so, they populated the world with humans and variations thereof. You see, the thing is, they saw creation, they wanted to keep it separate from the chaos, and they had created something in humans that hold creation down. If humans leave an area, the world basically rolls up kind of like a map. And so they need something out there to hold down all the parts of creation. So the entire world is populated, and each place has different types of humans that are specifically adapted to their setting, their surroundings. Then these Titans created something they call the Games of Divinity, and these were so amazing and so much fun that they really didn't want to waste time taking care of creation anymore. So they created the gods to rule creation while they were off playing their games. The gods really wanted to play those games too. See, the thing is, they couldn't turn against the Titans. They had been created specifically subservient and unable to resist the Titans. So the gods created the Exalted to fight against the Titans. And they imbued them with their own power and essence, but without any control over them. Because if they had control over them, they would maintain that inability to fight against the Titans. And there was a great war. It was terrible, because we're talking about fighting things that are incomprehensible in size. Like literally whole campaigns of war taking place inside the body of one Titan. All just to get to the heart so they could kill the Titan. But there's a problem. The Titans were never born, and therefore couldn't really die. In fact, death didn't exist until after the Titans were created themselves, so they existed outside of that, outside of time, outside of space. And so basically what happened is they defeated each of the Titans and locked the majority of them up inside of the biggest of them and sort of anchored it to creation and created sort of the underworld, which is inside out this guy's body, this Titan's body. So the Titans exist somewhere out there, somehow attached to creation. When the gods created the Exalted, there are several types. I will go into the main ones here, and you will be playing the premier one, the Solar Exalted. So these were created by the unconquered sun to be the god kings of creation. You guys are heirs to that right and responsibility. The Solar Exalted are the most powerful. They are the most perfect. they very realistically have no weaknesses. They are, literally intended to rule a creation that is hundreds of times the size of our planet. So when you look at the Blessed Isle there, it's kind of a small piece of the map. That's about the size of Eurasia. And creation used to be vastly larger than this map. At their most powerful, the Solar Exalted can literally reshape the world at their whim. Then there is the Lunar Exalted, which were created by Luna, and they were intended to be sort of the mates and also generals of the Solar Exalted. They are very adaptive, and in fact can change their form at their will, and are perfect and premier fighters. They basically can stand at the edge of creation fighting whole armies by themselves, and they can find a situation where, oh no, more enemies are approaching. Well, I guess I'll just grow more limbs and defeat more enemies at the same time. They are sort of, in a way, related to werewolves, in that they have a human form, an animal form, and then in between they have a war form. And this war, all three forms are considered to be their natural state. So something that can force something into its natural state would have no effect regardless of which of these three forms it's in. There was the Sidereal Exalted, created by the stars. The Sidereal Exalted are sort of existing outside of time and space as well, although that comes a little bit later than their initial creation. They are basically meant to be the bureaucrats of creation. They have a loom of fate that they oversee, and this loom of fate basically weaves a tapestry of time as it progresses, each thread being the life essence of a different being. This weave continues on, and they can see patterns developing before they're completely woven at current time and predict what's happening in the future. So they make perfect bureaucrats and also very good assassins and...
Can they curve bullets?
Yes. They can... in fact, because they exist outside of creation and outside of time and space, as soon as they walk around a corner, everyone who just saw them forgets that they were ever there, and basically attributes what they did and why they did it to something else. And lastly, for our main set, we have the Terrestrial Exalted. These guys were meant to be the armies of the other Exalted. The lower level functionaries, the day-to-day rulers and leaders, ruling small empires and whatnot, but still subservient to the higher Exalted. There is no limit to how many Terrestrial Exalted there can be, whereas the Sidereal, there is explicitly 300 of them, and no more, no less. One of them dies, they will reincarnate soon. And their essence sort of maintains some of their memories from previous exaltations, similar with the Lunar and the Sidereals. These sparks are indestructible, so even when the host dies, they will find a new host and reincarnate into this person, that person gaining some of the powers and memories and eventually able to work their way back up to what the previous host was. These sparks have sort of an innate desire to fulfill certain roles, to do certain things. So they look for a host capable of that. Not necessarily, they're not looking for a host who can already cast magic and defeat demons and, run across the 100 heads of a crowd, never even letting the people notice they were touched. But they do look for certain traits and qualities that are inborn in a person's personality. So when an exaltation happens, this spark attaches to that person's soul, their spirit, and gives them newfound power. This person, though, has to already fit certain qualities that this exaltation is looking for. And it has to happen in a time of vast and great need, and basically a moment of inspired excellence. So like an exaltation that's looking for somebody who is going to be a great warrior is going to exalt somebody who is already, even though they're mortal, a great warrior in a very great time of conflict when they choose the more difficult road. When they know they're defeated, they know there's no chance of survival, they could surrender and it'd all be over, but instead they pick up their arms once more, charge into certain death, cheering their battle cries and praising their ancestors. That's when an exaltation happens. Or, somebody who is going to exalt into a twilight caste that is going to be a great creator and...
Do they sparkle?
Well, actually, not so much sparkle as much as they glow like a bonfire. When your exaltation happens, you shine bright light for miles in all directions, and a pillar of light shoots from you up into the sky, regardless of the time of day, that is visible for hundreds of miles in all directions, no matter what time of the day or night it is. So even in the brightness of the sun, this pillar is visible in all directions. You get a glowing caste mark on your forehead that is based on which caste you are. There's 5 different castes. If you look at the character sheets here. Nope, they don't have it on them. Yeah, so we have 5 castes. And we're all going to play Solars, so I'm not going to get too much detail about the rest of the exalts. But for the Solars, we've got the Dawn caste. These are great war leaders. They automatically get every single type of combat skill as class skills. So like if you did certain types of World of Darkness, the system is based on World of Darkness. So certain World of Darkness things you have like skills that are favored, and those ones are cheaper to buy up and buy abilities for. This has a similar thing. The Dawn cast automatically get all the combat ones, so they can do archery, melee, martial arts, war, and thrown. Did I say thrown right?
Yeah.
Archery, thrown, martial arts.
Anyway, all
melee.
the physical combat stuff.
All the physical combat ones. You've got the Zenith cast, which are intended to be sort of the priest kings. They get. Let me scroll down. I'll pull it up in mine so I can get this correct. No, that's not what I wanted. There we go, 139. So the Zenith, they get athletics, integrity, which is integrity is basically your resistance to damage, resistance to social influence. That's not. They have more of them than necessary. Gosh darn it! I'll go to the character sheet. Gotta get these right. And it doesn't have them anymore.
We'll just
Anyway,
give it base over.
they're intended to be the
priests.
The priests. They have the ability to go anywhere, no matter how difficult the terrain. They can literally walk through a blizzard naked and not be affected by it. Walk across burning sands without being burnt. Basically, they can go everywhere and proselytize the worship of the unconquered sun. When they exalt, they get a direct link to the unconquered sun, get to see him and have a conversation with him. The rest of the exalted, not so much. The rest of the solars. The Zenith do. Then we have the Twilight. They are intended to be sort of the artificers and mages. They have the ability to cast sorcery innately, and furthermore, since they are solar, they get access to the third circle sorceries, which are more powerful than any others. They have the ability to craft anything and have in the past, when at their height, created magnificent palaces that are whole cities in and of themselves, sort of like Howl's Moving Castle. That would be a Zenith cast. They are able to do whatever they can think of. Then there's the Night cast, which are, in a way, they are assassins, rogues, they are intelligence gatherers. They're able to get anywhere they want to be, and nothing can hold them back. So that I think their cast abilities are athletics, stealth, and stealth covers sort of, it's not stealth, but it covers both sneaking and not being seen, as well as picking pockets, larceny, that sort of thing. They're able to like literally get anywhere and not be seen or detected. When they go full iconic, meaning all of they spent enough essence that they start glowing like a bonfire, they take on a shadowy form, like a silhouette, and are completely indiscernible. You cannot see any facial features, there's no discerning marks. You can't tell what color their clothes are anymore. They are completely indecipherable. And lastly, we have the Eclipse. The Eclipse cast are meant to be the faces, the diplomats, the people who are able to bring any two forces together and make an agreement. They literally have the ability to spend some essence and make a agreement binding to the point where either side will be cursed if they break the agreement, which can include themselves. They have diplomatic immunity with the enemies of creation. Those beings cannot harm them or anyone in their party unless the people in their party or themselves break some kind of agreement or some level of hospitality. So they can also go anywhere, and they have the specific skills for it in the sense that they have ride and sail, the ability to summon mounts out of thin air, ride them across the ocean or even through the sky, and get where they need to be faster than anyone else. So those are your 5 types, and there's more to it here. So getting back to the main story, remember I was saying there's the 4 different types, the main ones. They were ruling creation, everything was going great, they had just defeated the Titans, but there was an issue. On death, the Titans cursed those who brought them down. And the curse took different forms. For the Solars, which is the one we're going to care about, it took the form of making their strength into a weakness. See, the Solars' emotions, their attachments to creation, were what allowed them to ground themselves and stay who they were no matter what kind of chaos affected them. So, when the curse took its effect, their emotions started gaining more and more of a control over them, rather than them having control over their emotions. Eventually this would take the form of a limit break, in which case that emotion overrides everything. They cannot do anything except follow that emotion. So if their emotion was sort of a hatred of enemies, this hatred would suddenly come overwhelmingly powerful, and they would destroy anything in their way. Even people who were only barely involved or even were captives would be slew to get to their goals. Maybe it's a form of logic that they are strongest in, that's their strongest emotion. When they're hitting a fit of rage this way, they would basically follow the only logical conclusion, no matter who it hurt or who it destroyed. They would have no care for anyone else. And, maybe they're trying to wipe out a disease. All right, they will infect every single person in the city with this disease, study its effects, and learn how to defeat it. Doesn't particularly matter to them that they kill everyone in the city. They have discovered the cure. And this curse, every time they would hit this limit, it would be an even shorter time until they hit it again, until they were basically stuck in its throes constantly. And with beings that can literally alter creation at their whim, this is devastating on the rest of the world.
So, this madness that you're talking about, will it actually come into effect in this game to our characters? Or?
It will definitely start to come into a play with characters in a game. Basically, anytime, and we'll explain the details further. But anytime your guiding emotion or your guiding effects are tested, even if you are successful or whatever, it still adds to your limit. And eventually, once that bar fills up, you're gonna have to roleplay going nuts.
Oh dear.
Yep.
I think we should all play teenage girls. That way we just fit into the anime trope.
Yay.
Gosh.
So anyway, basically the Solars started destroying creation around them. They were ripping things apart, killing vast sums of people. They were out of control. Something had to change. So the Sidereals, seeing what was happening in the Loom of Fate and seeing that basically the world was about to end, the Solars were literally going to rip it apart and destroy everything, they secretly gathered together the leaders of the Terrestrials, organized them, and planned an assassination, a vast assassination of all 300 Solars and all 300 Lunars at the same time. There was a big celebration on the Blessed Isle to celebrate the turning of the year. They had almost every single person together and basically had the biggest red wedding you can imagine. They did everything they could, but you see, the Solars were powerful. And even being stabbed in the head was not a guaranteed death. Even being shot by arrows, riddled with arrows across the chest, on an unarmored person didn't really mean that much when they could flick the arrows off and summon invulnerable skin of bronze, or, summon their weapon, their armor, and their mount all at once and fly through the windows. So they wrecked a lot of creation in the process, and with their death, all these crazy contraptions they had created all across creation and needed constant perfect maintenance suddenly didn't have anything to control them. And a lot of them fell apart in very drastic ways. Imagine containing all the energy of a, continent-sized volcano to create a giant factory, and suddenly what's holding that volcano back fails. Whole islands were destroyed, whole cities were destroyed. It was a mess. And creation didn't, gradually shrink during this process. Vast sections of it just fell off. But it got worse. I told you that creation exists in this sort of bubble of chaos. Every time this chaos brushes up against creation, it kind of is forced into order, and it detests order. So when this happens, it creates basically armies of creatures that really, really, really want to go back to disorder. So they will try to kill every living thing around them so they can break that check of creation back off and go back to their original state. Their leaders are called the Fair Folk, and they are very similar to in Changeling the Lost, the Fair Folk there. They have a very similar vibe in that they are creatures of sort of madness that have no real attachment to creation. They exist in a completely different realm than what creation is. Have different anatomies and desires, despite the fact that they might take a human form. These guys basically found out that the Solars were all gone, and therefore maybe this time they could destroy all of creation, and they started pushing in. Solars were gone, the lunar war leaders were gone, the terrestrial were right beat up, and the Sidereals were trying to barely hold everything together. So it was devastation. Whole chunks of creation were falling off. They were pushing towards the central piece of the world, and it looked like all was lost when a single dragon-blooded, or terrestrial exalted, they're now called dragon-blooded, was able to brave the solar basically power location in the center of the Blessed Isle, activate the realm defenses, and defeat this army. No terrestrial exalted should have been able to get in there, but she somehow did. She is now the Scarlet Empress and rules all of creation. Her armies go throughout creation. When they killed the Solars, you would think, they'll just reincarnate, right? Well, one of the things the Sidereals did is they created a prison for the Solar Essence, so that when they killed them, they would be trapped within this prison and never to reincarnate. Some of them didn't quite get trapped in there, but the majority of them did. So some of them are still reincarnating out there, and so they created the Wild Hunt that's hunting down Solars wherever they exalt. So it's very dangerous to be a Solar Exalted. There's basically the rulers of the world are out for you at all times. Just recently, in recent times, something happened to the prison, and the Solars are free in the world once again. So they're exalting all over creation. Whenever somebody does something particularly heroic, they can exalt into a Solar, and the Wild Hunt rains down on them as soon as possible. So they're hunting them all over the world right now, and their resources are very, very stretched.
Yeah.
You guys are going to be Solar Exalted who have recently exalted. When we get to... We're going to basically build backstories for each of your characters. You're going to choose one of the 5 castes. You're going to have to decide what it is that you did that made you deserving of exalting. Something unbelievably heroic. Or powerful, or whatever you want to call it. You did something that no other person would consider possible. You're going to have to decide how it is you survived your first couple of days and even the event that it caused you to exalt. Because as soon as you exalt, everybody in the area knows who you are and where you're at and start hunting you down. It is literally law that you must be hunted down. Eventually you're going to have escaped, and then we'll get you to the location where the game will be starting.
Is plot armor significant enough?
Plot armor, I think, is a spell. Yes, it's called Invulnerable Skin of Bronze, but no. So plot armor is a thing, but at the same time, you're going to have to come up with what that Deus Ex Machina was. Okay? Our game will be taking place in the north, not all the way to the wasting tundra. We will be at, if you want to zoom in a little bit there, just north of the Blessed Isle. Control plus. There you go. If you go to the right there a little bit. Basically this isthmus here, from where it says Meadow to the east, all the way to where we have Grieve and Fortitude on the west. So I'm going to explain what each of these cities are about real quick. Hopefully it won't take too much longer here. I know I've gone on for quite a while, but we're going to talk about a couple of the cities in the far north. So starting with Fortitude, it is an ancient prison created by an empire that no longer exists, and it's basically now ruled by the prisoners, or the ancestors of the prisoners. The tunnels go very deep here, and they don't really know exactly what's under there other than that their god is down there, and he inspires evil and hatred and whatnot, basically dark emotions. Every now and then the various gangs that are always fighting each other band together and start trying to conquer the area around them, and basically the realm has to put them down. Grieve to the north was not really that big of a deal until just very recently. Someone has discovered, they call it the White Elixir, and it grants some form of immortality to those who drink it. If they drink it on the moment of their death, they become immortal. They seem to have a weakness with the sun and have to carry parasols around with them, and their pallor becomes very white, almost porcelain. So now there is suddenly a huge market growing up there around rich people from all over the world who want to live forever, and those who can supply the ingredients and whatnot necessary to make this white elixir. There is also an interesting thing in that there are tame lynxes that are native to the city. They seem to have a high level of intelligence. And there's less tame ones that prowl the back alleys. And there's also an interesting thing in that those who have taken the white elixir and are now living forever, whenever they're near the lynxes are very nasty with them. They're always hissing and showing anger towards them. There's also a legend that says if these lynxes, these cats, ever leave Grieve, that it will fall. To the south, further east and towards the south, right there across the inner sea from the Imperial City, we have Numena. This is a holy city, and this built around a giant pillar-like building that is said to be a weapon used to kill an anathema, a solar exalted, once upon a time. There are many priests that go through constant cycles of worship and prayer, from monastery to shrine to temple to holy site, and just continually make this pattern. The dragon-blooded have a wild hunt stationed here to hunt down anathema. This is sort of a processing location before they take them to the Imperial City, assuming that they want to keep them alive for some reason.
Which city is this again?
Numena. It's right there across from the Imperial City. So right there, yes. North of there we have Whitewall. This is basically the location of the Night's Watch from Great Game of Thrones. It is sort of a bastion of the south against the north. It is ruled by three triplet goddesses. They represent silver and ice, and their wall is created out of magics that prevent anything from getting through them, and is not so much an ice wall as it is a sort of opalescent, or not opalescent, pearlesque sort of finish to it, so it's pure white, alabaster maybe. They have made agreements with the powers that be to the north. The road you see coming north, you see sort of the line there, is inviolate. Nothing can fight, no one can fight each other on that road, but leaving it is very dangerous. To the north there is fair folk. To the northeast there is hungry dead. They're basically undead that consume the living and make them join their armies. And Whitewall is basically the buttress that prevents these things from making it further south. Part of their agreement, however, is that every year, was it? I believe it's every year. Yes, each year they take 24 living people outside the walls. 12 each for the fair folk and the hungry dead. Normally, it's their criminals, but when they run out of criminals, it's generally outsiders or socially people who are the edges of social society. It can be a very difficult thing to prevent yourself from being on that list when you're not from that city. To the northeast of Whitewall, we have Gethsemane. This was discovered by a group of survivors during basically a fair folk invasions. When they found it, it was completely uninhabited. And there is writing all across the walls, all across the insides of this underground fortress, that no one can speak and no one knows what language it is. There is tunnels that go deep, deep, deep into the dark places of the world underneath this city, and they have been slowly trying to close all of them off, except for the ones that they use to gather moss and gems and whatnot from underground. They subsist largely on the mosses that are fairly nutritional, as well as what they can scavenge from the surface when it's safe. They speak little in public, remain insular and wary of outsiders, and retain their ancestors' deep-seated horror towards disease and the walking dead. So that's the main cities in this area. Oh yeah, there's one other one. It's not on the map, but right about where the M is on Meadow is a city called Karash. It is the eastern terminus of that wall line, or that mountain range you see there. It is a place that they worship their ancestors, and their ancestors take an active part in defending their cities. When a warrior in their society dies, they end up forever serving on the walls, guarding the city at night against all comers. These guys had their own empire that was gradually expanding during the Cataclysm. However, once the Scarlet Empress started organizing the empire, they were able to conquer Karash and the Medoan people. So they basically now, their greatest warriors serve as janissaries in the imperial armies, and then return on retirement, bringing with them good knowledge, but also are constantly, the rest of the people are suspicious of them for the outside influences they bring. Until, of course, they die and take their place in the wall. Then they return to Medoan or Karashian society as honored ancestors. Up there in the wasting tundra, you can be from up that far north if you like. There is a couple of different groups there. Basically, there's two main ones. There are the Ice Walker tribes, which are basically similar to Inuit or pre-civilization groups up in Russia, and they basically follow different herds of animals. There's mammoths, there's elk, there's I'm forgetting a few. Bison, reindeer, mammoth, and elk herds that they follow. They worship their herds and use them for transportation and bone, sinew, leather, meat, all those sorts of things. And they hate the other tribes and will constantly war on each other. They consider others who follow the same sorts of herds to be sort of brethren, but in very hard times may still raid them. They are basically a bane on all civilized people because they see civilized people as being weaker and lesser than themselves, and will constantly raid any of them they come across. The other group up there is the Hislanti League, and these are some of the most progressive people in the entirety of creation. They have basically sail ski ships that they travel the wasting tundra in. They basically are giant skis with a ship built on top of them and a literal air sail that they use to catch the wind of the pillar of air up there to travel vast distances and very short periods of time.
So like the sand benders from
Yes.
Avatar: The Last Airbender.
In fact, Avatar: The Last Airbender is a fantastic representation of the terrestrial exalted. They are elementally themed.
Oh.
You've literally got earth, fire, wind, water, and life. So the plant side. Those five are the terrestrial exalted's castes.
Okay.
But they are literally firebenders, earthbenders, whatnot. The Hislanti League has also recently, and by recently I mean with the last couple hundred years, started developing hot air balloons and zeppelins that they are using to travel across the northern climes in safety. Because where a trap could be laid for their ski ships,
No one can get
no
it in
one
the
can
air.
stop them in the air. And they are getting a vast trade network built up there that is starting to cause worry of the Guild, which is basically the organization of trade throughout the rest of the world. And those are your basic possibilities of what kind of people you came from, and also what kind of enemies you might be facing when you exalt. There is a constant state of decay in the world. So, once upon a time, there was literally like helicarriers from Avengers flying around with mechs inside of them that would rain down and subjugate any kind of resistance or any kind of fair folk armies. They had giant pyramids that could fire out laser beams that could lay waste to an entire army. All those things, to a large extent, a lot of those things still exist, but have fallen either into disrepair or exploded, or just waiting for someone with the right capabilities to reclaim them. So that is the world of Exalted. I know it's taken a bit to explain all of that, but it does have a lot of interesting flavor to it, and a lot of mixing of things to it. Beyond that, do you guys have any questions for me?
So where are we going to start the game out?
The game will be taking place in Whitewall, but you can exalt from any location around there. And it'll, your backstory will be how you got to Whitewall and why.
Okay.
So our game will be taking place there. And like I said, the game is called Edge of Creation. So you guys are at what civilized folk consider to be the edge of civilization. Beyond this, dark horrors lie.
Okay, so the people that are farther north, the tribes and
The Ice Walkers tribes and the Hislanti League.
Yeah, so they don't exactly follow the law.
Oh yeah, the Hislanti League politely declines to pay tribute to the realm. The Ice Walker tribes would just kill anybody who came to collect any kind of tribute.
Okay, so then
And
would they even bother killing the Exalted? Trying to kill the Solars?
So no. They would see an Exalted as a powerful thing, sort of like you would a wolf. So what do you do with a wolf? You either let it go and avoid it, or you kill it to prevent it from killing you. So they just see Exalted as being large monsters.
Okay.
Or you raise it and teach it to hunt with you.
Exactly. And so that's the thing. I was saying that everything is trying to hunt you down. That's not entirely the case. There's a lot of things that kind of see Exalted like they would Timon and Pumbaa would see Simba. Oh, geez, it's a lion. But wait, if we raised it on our side, then it would grow up to defend us. Yeah. So we could have this super powerful God King on our side. The question is, can they really control something that powerful? And will that thing realize that they're trying to control it? So if they do it right, yeah, sure. It will actually end up being their leader someday. Question is, are they going to allow that to happen? Or can they do anything to stop it? So there are a lot of people who are trying to play with fire. Also, the Lunar Exalted, their essence wasn't trapped in the prison. And a lot of them actually managed to survive because they weren't the targets. So the Lunar Exalted still exist out here in the world. They've been existing on the very edges of creation as they've been continually hunted down by the Wild Hunt. The Lunar Exalted were once mates, specifically 1-to-1 with each Solar Exalted. Now that doesn't mean that, they were in a strictly monogamous relationship, but they were like the perfect mate for each Solar.
Yeah.
Whether that be friend, brother, husband, wife, mother, father, they can take all those sorts of relationships, but they are family. Like they're the perfect soulmate of each other.
Is it like Hancock where they're perfect but they weaken each other?
No. Although they do in a way in that, anything that you're attached to can become a weakness to you. In that sense. It's not like Hancock that their powers start weakening when they're near each other. But yeah, it does have some similarities there. Beyond that,
I think that's it.
yeah, the Lunars. Well, I'm not going to tell you too much about what they've been doing or why, because it's basically a secret to everybody who isn't one or isn't in their tribes. But they are seen as bestial warlords on the edges of creation trying to kill everybody. And they kind of do raid civilization.